I have literally zero hot takes when it comes to this film. Like, honestly, I went in, I knew I was gonna love it. I loved the first movie as well. So this is gonna be just an appreciation video, because at the end of the day, how can you not love how much care they put into this movie?
And here we are again.
Face to face.
That's a face. It's a big face. Just now noticing the baby legs.
They're not baby legs.
It's a little bit like a Bjorn.
No! God, please, no! No!
I think I'm gonna start by setting out the context of everything that was established in the previous movie, as well as within the Spider-Man universe slash multiverse when it comes to the cinematic releases, of course, but maybe even video games, why not? No Way Home was the last Spider-Man movie that we had to see at the cinema, and it was kind of disappointing at the end of the day. We are in a bit of a multiverse phase within the MCU, so we also had Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which was exploring the same kind of themes, and we all felt kind of underwhelmed, right? I think it's a good compromise that we can all agree on. If you did like No Way Home, if you did like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, I feel like we can all agree with the fact that they teased us with something that was way bigger than we expected, and then they delivered something that felt incredibly safe, if not just there to stimulate our geeky gland. That is kind of a disgusting analogy when you think about it.
Who's that Pokémon?
It's Pikachu.
Pikachu!
But if you look closely at all of those scripts, you will realize that there are not that many stakes at the end of the day, and we really feel that no one is in danger. At the end of the day, it doesn't really feel like a Spider-Man story. And at the same time, if you look at Tom Holland's trilogy, I feel like the last movie, No Way Home, is actually the only one that has the kind of epicness, the kind of pathos that a Spider-Man story needs to have. So it's kind of like in between two things at the same time. I almost feel like they didn't need to go with the multiverse thing in the first place, mostly because I really feel like they didn't really deliver an actual Peter Parker slash Spider-Man story within the entire trilogy before it. So I'm saying all of this mostly because there is a lot of improvement to be made, and I feel like fans, when they went into the Spider-Verse, they had zero expectations. They went into No Way Home with a lot of expectations.
Peter!
Yeah? Oh, sorry.
Did you mean that? Peter.
We're all called Peter.
Peter Parker.
Same again.
And now we have Across the Spiderverse, which is trying to ride the same wave, but at the same time it has to do something different. It has to give us something new, because we're in a bit of a superhero fatigue at the end of the day. I've talked about it in my review for Ant-Man Quantumania. I've talked about it for Love and Thunder, and definitely with movies like Shazam Fury of the Gods, where you can notice it even more.
I just dragon. I love my life.
But when it comes to Across the Spiderverse, I feel like they really nailed it.
Everyone keeps telling me how my story is supposed to go. Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing.
All stations, stop Spider-Man.
Mostly because the writing is really beautiful and complex, and you can see that because it has different point of views, and it kind of like takes risks when it comes to how this story needs to be told, so that every single Spider version in this film actually gets their time to shine, and we understand where they're coming from. And you will see it immediately, because the movie starts with Spider-Woman's perspective, and then it gets into Miles Morales' perspective, trying to see how he grew up and how he's basically finally turned into the Spider-Man that his universe needs. I'm not gonna try to spoil this movie too much at the beginning, and then maybe we'll get into spoilers to go into details, especially when it comes to the fact that this is a first part of a two-part movie, and it's kind of like Dune when you think about it. Actually, it's exactly like Dune.
Hey.
Okay, then. I'll see you around.
Oh, see you.
I really loved Dune, but I had this weird taste at the back of my tongue, being like, I feel like we can't really judge this movie yet, just because we need to see how they end the story. And I feel like if Dune Part 2, for example, doesn't nail the landing, then we'll have to go back, look at Dune Part 1, and realize that it will not really age that well. And we have the same exact dynamic when it comes to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Beyond the Spider-Verse, which is coming out next year. It's not the same thing as Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, Endgame, it's not the same thing at all, because this movie here is 100% part one of a complete story. And some people might find that disturbing, mostly because it is really cutting the story in half. Basically doesn't have a coherent climax when you think about it. And you can feel it a lot if you go in repeated viewings and you realize that they spend really a lot of time doing character development, setting up all of these new interesting characters, explaining the multiverse thing a little bit but not too much, because most audiences already know what it is. But this movie has so many quiet character moments that work so well, and that, fun enough, made it feel like a movie.
You and me, it's...
We're the same. In the important ways, you know?
My favorite thing about the movie is like it feels like a movie.
I know I keep referring to the Harry Styles things, but it's really true. This doesn't feel just like an animated movie. This feels like an actual movie. And I feel like Across the Spiderverse completely crystallized the feeling that I had with Into the Spider-Verse, meaning that I really got attached to these characters in ways that I've never gotten attached to any other animated characters in the past, or even any other Spider-Man characters when you think about it. This movie really hits the core of what it means to beat Spider-Man, the good but mostly the bad part, when it has to deal with villains that you create just by you being there as a superhero, and basically people turning into super villains to outskill you, to prove that they're worth people's attentions at the end of the day. This also has a very interesting character arc for the villain, which comes back and forth from the beginning through the middle act and at the end, and he becomes incredibly terrifying by the end.
Why do people say ATM machine?
Who said that?
The M stands for machine.
Spider-Man!
But the thing that I like is that it starts in a really weird way. He starts like a villain of the week, and it's something that they mention as well within the movie itself. He's very silly. He kind of has a bit of a Deadpool humor, meaning that he's basically just failing at being a villain, and it's really clear that he doesn't want to be a villain, but he doesn't really have a choice at the end of the day, because that's how he is. He's not wearing a suit. He's not like Spider-Man at the end of the day. He's like the perfect nemesis, because he's not allowed to have a double life. He cannot have a normal life, he cannot have friends and family and a job anymore. He cannot even fit within society just because of how disturbing his body and his powers are. And that's incredible, I think, because I know that most of Spider-Man villains are created by him in one way or another, and it's kind of the same things with most superheroes, if you think about Batman and the Joker, for example. And it's interesting because of that, because it really shows the repercussions of Spider-Man's actions, and this movie is really all about that. It's about taking responsibility for your mistakes and owning up to them at the end of the day. And I know that when I say this, you're probably thinking about No Way Home as well, because No Way Home is all about taking responsibility for a very stupid thing. But that is the problem. No Way Home is built on a very stupid mistake that Peter does and that Doctor Strange does as well, and they do it together, and it makes no sense at all at the end of the day. It feels like one of those science fiction mumbo jumbo thing that you're supposed to accept, even though you feel like there is something wrong with the whole thing.
Freshwater or salt? You know, because you're an octopus.
While this movie here is 100% built on everything you've seen in the previous film, and you really feel like it really sucks to be Miles Morales' persona in this movie, mostly because he was trying to do his best. And at the end of the day, like any other Spider-Man in the history of Spider-Man, he didn't choose any of it. He was bitten by the radioactive spider as well. It doesn't really matter where the spider comes from. It doesn't really matter whether he maybe was not supposed to be Spider-Man at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter whether he's not maybe the perfect Spider-Man yet, because you could say that about any kind of Spider-Man ever. Because being Spider-Man is a lot about the ups and downs. It's not about being the perfect version of yourself constantly. If you look across all the different films, if you look across all the different games as well, you could really feel that what people like about Spider-Man, it's his humanity. It's the fact that he fails most of the times, and even though he fails, he still remains a really good person who is trying to do the good thing for others.
And if I could rewind, if you could remind me what I felt before I felt
Look at you.
Look at me.
And it's all about sacrifices, it's all about taking responsibility. That's what being Spider-Man is about. And this movie is really kind of like fighting against that idea. And it's kind of like taking that idea into a more pessimistic way. Kind of like it is Spider-Man's responsibility to go through a certain specific kind of loss. It's his responsibility to like suffer because everyone else has suffered. And they actually think that this is what makes Spider-Man special. The people that he loses, the people that die because of him, the people that he cannot save at the end of the day. But I really don't think so, and I'm pretty sure this is what they're gonna develop in the next movie as well. They're gonna start proving what being Spider-Man actually means, and this movie is all about deconstructing that idea and having all of these different Spider-Man versions basically following this one guy who has only one specific way of interpreting what it means to be Spider-Man.
It's like my Uncle Kagi once said, with great power comes great big booty bitches.
That is not what he said.
He totally said it.
And we have to talk about all the different versions of Spider-Man that we have here. We have some crazy ones, like you have a T-Rex, you have a guy on a horse, you have one that is basically kind of like an artificial intelligence because it's one Spider-Woman who is sitting in her apartment and she's kind of like projecting a virtual version in another world. And we've got the OG Peter Parker Spider-Man that we really fell in love with because he's the adult version of Spider-Man that we never actually get to see. And I really like the idea that this movie is all about blurring the lines in between what it means to be a villain, what it means to be a superhero, and how at the end of the day it's not as black and white as we think. If you feel like the first movie, it's kind of simplistic when it comes to representing like villains. If you think about Doc Ock, if you think about Kingpin and all of those other ones, of course, the only nuanced one was probably the Prowler, so Miles Morales' uncle. But in this movie here, it feels like everyone is nuanced, everyone gets their time to shine, and we actually get to understand where they're coming from. I feel like this is definitely the most perfect multiverse movie that we'll ever get, and this has to do with the animation style. The animation style really allows you to go completely insane. There is an example of Spider-Punk, for example, whose background and whose like character design keeps changing constantly into like weird kind of like Vogue magazines of like the 90s and the 80s and stuff like that. And of course the introduction scenes that you get when it comes to all of these different Spider-Mans are always so incredibly funny and interesting, and this is kind of like the perfect adaptation of so many different comics that have been created across the years that you get to see on screen.
Hey, are these your drawings?
What? No,
Oh,
no.
good.
Where's my money?
Sometimes you get to see like other jokes that are like popping up with just like 1 second, and I'm pretty sure those are gonna pay off on repeated viewings as well. What I'm saying is that there is a lot of basically text on top of text on top of text when it comes to this film. There is the text that is basically the main story that keeps going from the first film that I talked about before. Then you have the meta text of like understanding all of the references to comic books, to other previous versions of Spider-Man, because we have those as well, so live action versions. And then we have all the other metatextual comic book references and meta jokes that you can see in the background and stuff like that. Things that you would notice only if you watch the film several times. There are so many different levels of enjoying this film, and it's kind of insane when you think about it.
Web on my face? What's the deal?
Miles! He's right there! He's right there! Turn around!
I don't see anything, boss.
And I feel like this is one of those movies where it's accessible but also not accessible at the same time, just because of how much work it requires for you to pay attention at everything that is going on screen. But honestly, this is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. If you think about the Mitchells versus the Machines, Into the Spider-Verse, once again, there is so much complexity going on screen. If I can give you one advice, try to maybe when you go to the cinema, step a little bit back, try to be as far as the screen as possible, because there is a lot of stuff going on literally everywhere on the screen. So if you're too close, you're literally gonna be missing what's happening on the edges of your angle of view. I think one thing that I really liked about this film is also how they develop all the different relationships, the different families, and all the different surrogate families as well. How some Spider-Man, they literally have lost everyone, so the only family that they have is literally all of these spider people coming from different multiverses, and that's why they're so dedicated to their mission as well, and they will not even question it at the end of the day. It's kind of fascinating because of that. You've got Miles Morales' relationship with his mother, which is really cool, and it's way more developed than in the previous film. Then we've got Gwen's relationship with her father, which is something new that we get in this film. And then we have just a shit ton of diversity and things that honestly I didn't know I would ever see on screen, like in the history of cinema or something like that. Like there is an Indian version of Spider-Man who is really fun, and it doesn't really feel like they're just hinting at it. He really feels like an actual character within the movie with his own backstories and all the different cultural references that fit with that story as well. It doesn't feel superficial, that's what I mean. And there is so much representation. We can see in a moment, for example, a Muslim Spider-Man. We can see a Spider-Man on a wheelchair, and you would think that these kind of Spider-Man, they're there just to make an appearance or to be in the background so that everyone feels represented, and it's kind of like cheap representation. But actually no, most of the characters that I actually mentioned, there are people who actually have their own dialogue lines, they have their own jokes and ways of interacting with Miles Morales, and they're actually really cool. That's the thing that I like about them. For example, the cowboy on a horse Spider-Man version I mentioned before, he's the most silly Spider-Man I've ever seen, and he still gets his time to shine. We also have Spider-Mans from the comics as well, who are very one-dimensional at the end of the day, but it's 100% on purpose. They're kind of like deconstructing that as well, and that's the thing that I loved about this film at the end of the day. This film feels very honest, it feels very genuine, it feels like it's poking fun at itself, but also taking itself really seriously, and it kind of like perfectly blends all of those things together. I could sit here and list so many other details of this film that I really loved, but I feel like I really want you to go in and enjoy it and have your own interpretation of it, because honestly I had such a good time and I'm really looking forward to see it again.
And then I looked at my uncle and...
let me guess. He died?
But let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments, how it ranks in between all of those other Spider movies that have come out in the last few years. If you liked this video, last week I did something quite fun where basically I went online to look for so many different weird reviews on Amazon, on Reddit, on Letterboxd, and basically I gave them to you so we could have a little laugh together. I think it's really fun sometimes to have these kind of simple videos so we can just take a step back and just enjoy our time, and we don't have to actually like tear movies apart at the end of the day. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to every single Spider-Man in the universe, because there are so many and they're so cool, and this movie proves once again that Spider-Man is kind of like an endless pit of imagination. If you look at all the Batman movies we've had in the last few years and all the Spider-Man movies, I think the Spider-Man like lore has so much more potential than Batman at the end of the day. I just want to see more of it. Anyways, I'm Patrick and this is Torn Apart.
In the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
I respect every single Spider-Man in here. Does that include me?
No, you fuck off!
Da 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 da